every single week on Friday evenings. Time is variable, obviously, but we will be doing this podcast every single week on Friday. We actually have a dedicated channel in the Discord that is meant for you guys to know what the topic is going to be ahead of time and give you a chance to discuss it, contribute to it, make suggestions, ask questions, share your insights, and we will be talking about insights that we gain from that discussion every week on the podcast. So if you guys aren't already in the Discord, please join and participate in the conversation. It definitely helps things along. Are very opinionated about this kind of stuff, which is why we have a podcast about this. Okay, let's get started. Boom! What's up, guys? My name is Merrick TV. Sorry that we had such a delay this week. We had a lot of stuff to work out behind the scenes. I had some camera issues, but we are back. Today, we're going to be discussing a singular topic. In fact, this is exactly the kind of thing that I really enjoy. But it's a nice t-shirt. Thank you very much. I really like talking about the differences between MMOs, mechanics, systems, why people like to play one versus another. All of these things are very interesting to me. Last week we did do the podcast again, and we talked about sort of like current events, but this is the kind of stuff that I like a lot. So we're going to get really in depth in this topic today. What we're discussing is itemization, gearing in MMOs. I think a lot of people, I'm just going to give a little preamble about the topic, but what this means is basically everything. I think when you first start playing a game, it's not such a big deal. You're basically just going and leveling, enjoying the game. But as you get to high level, this is where games have a very significant divide. How games make item rarity, where you get good items from, best in slot, gear creep, power creep, additional expansions, trivializing previous gear, things like the gear treadmill. These are all things that make or break an MMO and really define one game from another. I think a lot of us here are from Guild Wars 2. That's where I met a lot of you guys, and Guild Wars 2 stands out among these games as being one of the most unique in the way in which it handles this system in general. So we're going to be talking about the differences between them, all the different MMOs that are out right now, what makes one good, what makes one bad, why you play one, why you play another. And it should be a very interesting discussion. So again, if you guys have any questions at all, make sure to share them down below. Let me introduce my beautiful, amazing team. Coffee break. Bam. Oh, also let me turn off the music. I don't want to get in trouble. There we go. Down below is my good friend Cryptic Villain. Cryptic and I have been playing games together for years now. We met in Guild Wars 2. We've been raiding together for a very long time. In fact, it was Cryptic and I that started talking late at night about games, and people said, hey, you guys should do a podcast. So this is how that ended up happening. Judy Vision, my beautiful wife, down in the bottom right-hand corner, looking as gorgeous as ever. You're amazing. And you guys, all of you in chat in the upper right-hand corner, your chat will be on stream. Oh, Virus is camera desynced from voice. Yeah, it's a little bit, but I'll fix it in post. Okay, so I just want to start off by saying that there's something very common that I sort of talk about when it comes to MMOs and MMO gaming. I think a lot of us are sort of MMO gamers. We play one game or another game. If we burn out on one, you'll end up leaving to go to another. If a brand new MMO comes out, you're curious about it and you'll check it out. Basically, that means that there's this common ground that you can kind of compare between all MMOs. Raiding is always going to be there. Crafting is always going to be there. The leveling process, the immersion of the game, the graphics, like the guild systems. There's so many different things that are sort of a thread that is consistent throughout MMOs. And you'll probably hear me talk about this often, but I talk about like an MMO summit. It makes me very frustrated when I see a brand new game come out and act as though they've never seen another MMO. This happens a lot. They're like, we made a game in the dark and pretended that we never noticed that another game has done this system better. No longer are the days where just being different means being better. There was an era in MMO gaming where that was true. Everyone compared everything to World of Warcraft, and if you wanted to be better or get any attention at all, you had to do something different from World of Warcraft or whatever other games were out there. That is no longer the case. I feel like when you get to a new game, like Lost Ark is the big hype game of the week. I know a lot of you guys are playing it. We definitely, all three of us are actually playing it. We love this game. But when you get into the game, what's the first thing that happens? The naming system. You know, like, can you get a name? Can there be 2 words in the name? Can you capitalize the letters in the name? Like, how unique must the name be in terms of the server or the whole game? These are things that it really frustrates me when games don't check in and be like, hey, this has been fixed. you know, like we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are better ways to do this, and they pretend as though they haven't seen it. That's really applicable to a lot of different things in MMOs, except this. And this is what makes this discussion very interesting. Itemization can please some people and piss off other people, and vice versa. Everyone is looking for something different. So this is not one of those things where we have just fixed the problem. We found the best way to do it. That's not at all true. Every game has their own way of doing it. Every game has positives and negatives. And we're going to sort of mull over those right now. So Cryptic, what is the first MMO that you went to? I want to get an evolution for both you and Junie. Like, what was the first game that you really experienced itemization in, so that you got used to one thing and then went to another thing and it was different?
Yeah. So I had played a bunch of like little different MMOs back in the day. It was like Perfect World and some other stuff dabbling around. But the first one that I really committed to and played long term was Eve. Um, Excellent coffee break mug. You just replace Barrick with the coffee break mug.
I didn't need the camera at all. I just I just put up the coffee break mug.
But the first MMO I really played at long term for many years, forever, was Eve, and I got really used to Eve's itemization. Eve, I mean, Eve, as you know, is I, I don't know. Some people would call it hardcore. I wouldn't necessarily, but you know, when you get items and gear in Eve and you equip them to your ship, because that's what your ships are items, and then the stuff you put on the ships are items. And you go fly that ship, and then it explodes. You lose everything. The ship is gone. Some things drop, but you're probably not going to get those back because
Oof.
somebody's going to take it or whatever.
Yeah.
So you know,
It's from PvP. You're saying that like
PvP
PvP
and
can
PvE,
just
you can die in PvE and lose your stuff.
yikes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a little hardcore.
When you die in Eve, your ship goes boom, and the items on it have a random chance of dropping or not. But the ship itself is generally expensive, so that's another big loss. But yeah, I mean that's where I come from. So to me, the progression for the thing that I enjoyed about Eve and a lot of MMOs is that there is always something to continue to work towards most of the time. But when I go back to Eve, if I went back to Eve right now, I would not be way behind everybody. I'd be behind, but I could pick up where I left off and feel like the stuff that I have, my super carrier that I spent all that time earning and farming money for, and is the second, most expensive ship in the game, is still a super carrier. And I can, it still has value and, use.
Okay, so basically what that means is that getting the gear can have its own difficulty. Losing the gear is
Yes.
much more of an issue in that game than in any other game. But what you just brought up is that after all these years, there hasn't been enough treadmill or creep, right, to invalidate the gear that you had back
Yeah.
then, right? So
Yep.
that's it?
Because a lot of the treadmill for non PvP comes from skills, and then the treadmill for PvP is losing stuff and having to buy it again because it's gone when you lose it. Now that's a whole nother separate discussion, and I don't think that that's how every MMO should do it. I think that really only works in Eve. Um, but
I don't really want to
yeah.
lose my pants. I don't want to die
I
and
know
have
you
my
don't want to lose
pants
your pants.
stolen or broken or
I don't think that'd be a problem for you though. I think
you have to wear
just
pants to have them stolen.
Yeah,
is
you
what
have
you're
to
saying.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, pants are a DPS loss.
Yes.
What about you, Judy? I think I know more about you, but would you say
Well,
that
yes.
any of the MMOs that you did before Guild Wars 2 had a specific kind of itemization?
No, I was gonna say, like, because I played the only other MMO I really played before Guild Wars 2 was Fiesta, and I honestly don't even remember what the itemization is in that game. Yeah, it was really a long time ago, and I don't even think I made it to max level. But as we know, Guild Wars 2 doesn't have really the the gear treadmill at all. So
Right. So, like,
I
before we even get into Guild Wars 2, because I think it's important to think of Guild Wars 2 as a really significant departure
Well,
from a
right, it
norm.
is a really significant departure. And the only other experience I really had back at the beginning of those Guild Wars 2 times would be a few years after I started playing Guild Wars 2, and that was with DC Universe Online. So I guess
Yo.
actually that was the first taste I got of gear progression. And DCU was very satisfying for me. Now I was, it was very new. I wasn't jaded from playing WoW gear progression for years, but it was exciting. Like you would do these little mini dungeons and raids in DCU, and you'd get pretty cool gear pretty consistently, and it was exciting to like level up your item level for me. So that was probably my first experience with the gear treadmill, so to speak.
Yeah, and so I think it's important to sort of outline what the gear treadmill is, right? So I think a lot of people go back and point to World of Warcraft as maybe like the pinnacle of the gear treadmill and what that sort of entails. So we'll discuss that. I would like to say, just to give a little background on me, my first MMO was EverQuest, as a lot of you guys know, and in World of Warcraft, I think gets the brunt of a lot of hate that they don't deserve because they weren't the ones that created that system. They also get credit in a positive way for a lot of things that they also didn't invent. It's just that World of Warcraft was the big water cooler MMO, right? It was a huge shift in MMO evolution where people played EverQuest, but you didn't know anyone else who played EverQuest. You didn't talk about it. It wasn't popular enough. If you tried to explain it to anyone, they'd be like, and they knew what it was, they'd be like, "Oh God, it's that thing that makes people obsessed and ruins lives." Like there wasn't nothing positive about it. I want to say that World of Warcraft actually changed the landscape completely because playing MMOs became cool and popular. You would go to work and sit at the water cooler and hear someone say World of Warcraft. You'd be like, "Holy crap, you play WoW," and it sort of changed the whole thing. Of gearing in EverQuest, and the same is true in World of Warcraft, it is a progression as you get to high level, right? You can get better gear from rarer mobs, you can go to dungeons, fight harder content, and get better gear, and then eventually, at the end of the game, you invest a huge amount of time in gearing. Not only gearing for raids, getting ready to walk into a raid, but I think this is such an interesting and essential element about rating and an end game in the way that it used to be, is that like for Guild Wars 2 players, you may not even understand this or think that this is very bizarre, but when you first walked into a raid, there's two things about that raid. One is its difficulty based on its encounter, its mechanics, and just basically how you would expect Doom to be more challenging than Mersat Overseer. There's differences in bosses, but then the second thing about a boss is that you walk in completely undergeared for that encounter. And as a guild, as a team, it was expected that you would go against this boss over and over again, in fact, this is how guilds used to work. They would bring their best players at first to down the boss, right? It would take them a long time. It would be really challenging because they're undergeared and underexperienced. And then as you're getting more and more experience, you're gaining experience, you're getting better at the fight. But as you start to get wins, you're also starting to get gear. You're getting better gear for your best team, and they're making it easier to farm this, right? So like they're getting more experience, but they're also getting better gear. They're doing more damage. They're taking less damage, and that fight becomes more doable. And then you're able to sort of get gear for the wider guild, and everyone would go in and gear. And so the longer you had exposure to a boss, the easier and easier it got through this gear. You sort of understand, but what makes it a treadmill, and what was really, a gear treadmill is kind of like a terribly dirty term in modern MMOs, wouldn't you say? I think that's probably pretty fair. Most people can't be convinced of that being a positive thing, but when a new expansion comes out, new content would usually raise the level cap. And if you raise the level cap, it trivializes everything that you were wearing, and now you have to start all over again. I think the typical experience is that you gear up in a raid and you're a total badass and you're having a great time, and then the new expansion comes out, raises the level cap by 10 levels. In 2 or 3 levels, you've replaced this epic raiding gear from raids with stuff you're getting from regular quest mobs or trash that you find as you're leveling. And then you have to start that process all over again. So this is something that I think a lot of modern people, like modern MMO gamers, really dislike. Did you play a game like that, Cryptic? Wait, I can't hear Cryptic.
I also can't hear.
Sorry about that. Perfect World was like that. Trying to think of another MMO that I played that was like that. Nothing comes to mind right now, but I've played a bunch of MMOs, so I'm sure there was. Oh, SOTOR was like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, more classic. Well, I guess first off, do you guys feel that the gear treadmill as it is most well known as it exists in WoW is inherently a bad thing? Like all things considered.
Okay, so I feel like I'm gonna single myself out as the enemy here because I don't think that it's a bad
Get him,
thing.
guys.
Okay, and that's why we were talking about Guild Wars 2. 2 is a huge an intentional departure from this because they knew that was a bad thing. So I think that the most people that we know in here that we've met from Guild Wars 2, and most times that I stream, right? Most of the people that I talk to are from Guild Wars 2. The very concept of a gear treadmill is like, yeah, grab your torches, let's burn it down. This is a terrible thing. So no, and I'll go into detail about why in a bit, but I think there's real things that are good about it.
Junie?
Well, my answer is sort of a question. It is a question. If not gear treadmill, what is the alternative? Because I mean, this is what we get with Guild Wars 2, right? If you get up to max level and you have you have the best gear, and then new content comes out, but you don't have any goal, there's no point in getting better gear because there is no better gear. That is a less motivation. So the real question is, what is the alternative to it?
Well,
Because without that, you don't have goals.
well, I think there are a bunch of alternatives that we'll get into discussing. But I guess my question for you is: are you satisfied with the WoW gear treadmill, or are you dissatisfied with it as a whole? Overall, what it brings to the table. So like when you level to max level and you do the raid, you get your gear, and then the expansion comes out and your gear is just invalidated. Are you okay with that? That you have to grind back up again, or are you, do you not feel happy when you lose that progression that you made?
So I'll speak to that because I have definitely experienced that process. I think if you play World of Warcraft for years, or if you played EverQuest before that, I think that's part of the experience of an expansion. Like, it's funny because in World of Warcraft, uh, I think you have a different experience than you do with normal MMOs. With normal MMOs, you can kind of consider that everyone that's there already is going to be really hyped, right, for the new content, the new expansion. They're probably going to stay, and you can assume that they're going to stay with enthusiasm. They're already playing the game before they have the new content, and then the newer content is going to make them very excited. Um, in a game that has World of Warcraft progression, you sort of think of them as chapters. It's kind of weird. I think that a lot of people that are like, I'm really into Legion, and my guild is super into this, super hardcore. We're having a great time. We're raiding like crazy, and I'm a Blood Death Knight, for example. My Blood Death Knight is super geared. I love it. It's been a blast. New expansion comes out. You have a lot of people that are very excited, but there's also this contingent of people that are like, you know what, I'm gonna not play this expansion. I'm gonna leave and not do that, and it's because they don't want to do that process again. Really interesting experience that depends on who you are and where you are in the game. There are some people that are behind, and maybe they were in college and they were not able to really get into it. They didn't get geared. They weren't ready. And so they never got to experience the end game of that expansion. For them, it's like, okay, all right, guys, everyone get ready. 8 days left until the next expansion. We're going hard this time. Everyone's going to be re-synced at the same level, right? We're all going to be equalized back down to, whatever crappy gear that we get from leveling. And then we start the raiding process over again. This is my chance, right? I'm going to go hard this time. Or the guy that's like, my guild forced me to be a holy priest, and I had to heal my way through this raid. I didn't want to do that. And this expansion, because gearing is such a thing, right? This is another element about it, is that gearing, it's not just the gear treadmill, but also like the investment in a single character, right? If you raided and put that whole amount of work on a holy priest, and you're like, I'd also like to play a arms warrior or whatever, gearing that up again is going to be really difficult. You're going to have to go through that process again, or wait until your guild has that raid on farm, and then you can just sort of like get carried through. And a lot of people aren't going to have that opportunity, so a new expansion is also a new opportunity to switch mains. And then there's the guy who's like, I put so much work into this. I've been doing great. I just don't want to go through this again. I'm not going to play this expansion. So I think they probably lose some already interested players when an expansion comes out, and they gain some and have some people come back. I know that the times that I've quit WoW and then come back to WoW, it's always very exciting to come back at an expansion because I get that feeling of a fresh start. Ask me what my feelings on it are. It's it completely depends on how I feel about the game at that
I mean,
time.
I think the important thing is that if people like the classic gear treadmill, there's already a game that exists for you, which is WoW, right? I mean, I think if you're happy with that system, then there's already a game that exists for you. As far as fixing the potential or the definitely, in my opinion, the existing issues with that system, which is all the things that you've outlined, Merrick, about losing your progression, that whole rinse and repeat cycle, literally a treadmill chasing a carrot on a stick that never ends. There, I do not feel there's a good solution, and that's what I would like to. There are options, but I don't feel a single MMO has done it properly. I feel like not all, but I feel like a lot of us can agree Guild Wars 2 went too far in one direction with that. They have created the anti WoW treadmill. They have created the
Yeah.
non treadmill. Is what, and not an escalator. What's the things at the airports that
Just go in a straight
flat?
line.
Yeah, they're just
Uh,
flat.
People movers. I don't
Yeah.
know.
People movers.
Yeah,
They call them in Disney.
yeah, they just move. They don't go
Yeah.
they don't go up or down. Moving
Moving walkways. You saw.
They've created a moving walkway. You stand on it, it takes you somewhere.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I think what I want at least is that I want an escalator. I want something that, I requires some thought, and an escalator is a bad example now, but like, requires some, um, progression on my part. But then when I leave and come back, because inevitably you're going to leave. I don't know. I can't think of I don't know a single person that is stuck with an MMO forever, right? Like, I mean, I played Eve for
I was gonna say
13
go back
years.
to the EverQuest servers. You'll find people that have been playing that since 1999. But I think in general you're correct. It's
Those
not.
people, they can stay there.
WoW 2 has like
Yeah.
dieharders, right? That like I'm not an MMO player. I'm a WoW player, and they just
Yeah, well, they're not MMO players. They're WoW players, or they're EverQuest players. Eve has Eve players. And I was an Eve player for a long time, and then I moved on to other MMOs eventually. And I think that for people that I think for the average person, for the average adult that has things to do, the gear treadmill does not lend itself to any kind of, just regular productive lifestyle, and it does not lend itself to wanting to check out other games, because it just, and you guys, this, as soon as another game is announced and like comes out, every single other MMO puts on an event right as that game's coming out.
try to keep their player base.
They will launch an expansion, they'll put an event out, they'll do something. And that is content that you're missing out on, that you won't be able to go back to, because and stuff progressions you're falling behind on because you want to check out this new MMO. And I mean, we're seeing that right now. We've got, like, at least me personally, I've got 4 different games I'm trying to play at once right now.
Same. The same games as you, but yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. And being, if I was playing WoW right now and a new expansion came out, I would have to drop it entirely because I wouldn't have the time. It'd be impossible. And I feel like a middle ground is really what a lot of people are clamoring for, because, I mean, you can't please everyone, but I think it would please the larger majority, and would capture this portion of, like, the Guild Wars 2 community that wants some itemization, that wants some gear progression, and capture a large portion of the WoW community that doesn't want to keep getting reset every expansion, and find that middle ground that allows them to still have progression but not lose their overall, like, not fall so far behind that you don't want to go back. Like,
well, let's give some frame of mind, or just a frame of reference for what Guild Wars 2 does, just in case there are some people who end up watching this that aren't from Guild Wars 2. Saying is absolutely true. I think that Guild Wars 2 reacting to the gear treadmill, which was pretty heavy for a long time and felt pretty oppressive, ended up creating a system that was entirely the opposite. This game is celebrating its 10th year or something, coming up pretty soon. It's been around for a very long time. Guess what? The same gear that was good in year 2 is still the best in slot gear that is here in year 10. That is almost insane. It's unprecedented. It was at the time for sure, and to this day it's still pretty unique. ended up doing was not only creating a best in slot gear that was very that was obtainable and then never replaced, but they also made it incredibly easily obtainable in any game mode that you wanted to do. This was actually groundbreaking when it came out and caught everyone's attention. It wasn't just that, like World of Warcraft or EverQuest before it or any other MMO, all of the best gear was locked behind the best and most difficult content, group-oriented combat, right? Raiding yielded the best and strongest gear that you could possibly get. It was the hardest thing to accomplish and then yielded the best and hardest to find gear. Oftentimes the coolest looking gear also. There was that experience where you show up in a games like Hub City and you're sitting around cooking, you know, the rat meat that you got at level 2 or whatever, and you turn and you see, you know, big flaming fiery warrior of doom, and you're like, holy crap, look at that guy, like, where did he get that stuff? That is so cool. I want to be him someday. That's an iconic part of the MMO experience, right? When you first see that and you're like, oh man, look at this adventurer, this could be me. And the idea that you had to do all of this stuff in order to be that guy, that it wasn't just that he spent a ton of money at the gem store, that he was afforded a certain amount of awe and respect because he had accomplished all of this great stuff in the game in order to correspondingly look that awesome. And so that experience was changed drastically with Guild Wars 2, because not only was best in slot gear obtainable early on and never replaced, it was also gettable by anything you did. You could craft it. You could just sit around and craft it. And the crafting materials weren't things that you needed from raid bosses. That wasn't like a weird workaround. You could literally just craft it. You could do PvP and get it. You could get random ascended drops from open world things. You could do World v World and get it. You could literally do any fractals, right? Any kind of game mode that you really wanted to do, and you could just get best in slot gear. And it sort of changed the landscape of the MMO in general. And once you got it, you knew for sure that it was never going to be replaced. For those of us who've been around the game for almost 10 years, and for those of us who raid like crazy or do fractals, like the end game content we do consistently, we have best in slot gear falling out of our pockets all over the place. How many excess ascendants do you guys have access to? If I wanted to, and you know, you guys know, you salvage them now, right? And what do you get for the salvaging things? The ability to make more. And that's really all you get.
That's it. Yeah.
The experience is totally different. It has lost all of its ooh and ah, right? There's no wow factor for Ascended gear. Legendary is the only tier above Ascended gear, and all it means is basically an unlimited supply of Ascended gear. That's what it means. It means that you can change the stats freely to any other stat combination, which means that you can rework your Ascended gear to be any other Ascended gear. So beyond that, it's just convenience. And I think for a lot of people, that's really exciting. You know, they're able to do the gameplay that they want to do and feel like they never fall behind. And that is great. For a certain contingent of players, this really is the best system. But like I said at the beginning, that isn't true for everyone. For those of us who liked raiding and wanted to accomplish great things and get great things as a reward, Guild Wars 2, and this, when I tell this to other players of other MMOs, it blows their mind. Like, they're absolutely baffled. But the best way to explain raids is that the gear that you are wearing when you walk into your first raid that you will ever do is as good of gear as you will ever get by the time you have finished every raid boss in the game 100 times over. You will not be better off, better geared than you are the second you step into raids. And not even the best looking gear comes from raid bosses. So then it really does, like, you think like, well, we're just giving people options and we're changing the negative stuff. You can't stop the discussion there. It actually changes the landscape of the game and ends up affecting these great dynamics of coming together and accomplishment versus reward. That system actually changes, and that sort of unravels the fabric of MMO gaming in an interesting way that isn't good for everybody.
If legendary gear had slightly improved stats, would you have you would have like 3 full sets of legendary armor, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Phoenix Uprising, what's up, man? Soon you'll be able to get Mystic Clovers. Wait, Phoenix Uprising. That's Phoenix. Phoenix Uprising?
Phoenix Uprising.
Okay. Mystic Clovers for salvaging raid Ascended gear. Yes, and that's great, right? We need more incentive to be able to do this. And this, I mentioned this a lot in terms of Guild Wars 2, because it is very fascinating. Look at the people who have been around raiding for a long time, who never burn out on Guild Wars 2 and are still doing the same content every week, every day, over and over again. And it's because, and Junie touched on this in the beginning, that you have to find some sort of incentive, right? And in Guild Wars 2, you must create your own incentive. And the people that are doing this all the time, right? Like when I was raiding every day, I was trying to play very underpowered builds to a very high level and try to get people's attention. I love shocking people by beating everyone as a hammer scrapper or a power reaper. Then I got into raid training, like Sneb, right? He raids every day. He does raid trainings. And so you're helping the community, right? That's another like intangible way of incentivizing you doing this. Or people like Isa and Win, right? Diaxon, guys who are doing raid clear racing, right? They're just trying to get the best raid clear times ever just to compete on Reddit with other people who are doing the same thing. We must artificially create goals and incentives to make it worthwhile to keep doing. Otherwise, you absolutely get burned out, right? So, I mean, like, I think Cryptic, you're probably burned out.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit.
Well, what about like a happy medium? Mai actually put in the coffee break channel in the Discord about Final Fantasy, gave a little explanation of how Final Fantasy does it at the end, and it's kind of a middle ground, I think, because like you were saying before in the other game, you can do crafting, and the difference between uh like max level and maybe the crafted gear, or like every time an expansion comes out, maybe is the difference between exotic and ascended. But the difference isn't that big. So unlike with WoW, where it's totally destroyed and you have to go on that gear treadmill immediately to do any content. Final Fantasy kind of takes that middle ground where your gear is still pretty good and there's other options. You can craft gear that's almost as good as the best gear you can get. So what about just closing that gap? Give it to people as a way to, yes, like Cryptic said before, if legendary was a few stats higher, would you have it? Yes, so would I. It would be worth doing all that
I would.
monotonous grinding to
I
get
would.
the legendary, because for those few extra points, because you have to have it, right? If you're going to do any sort of like statistics
Well,
or
if you're trying to be competitive, right? Like,
right,
so
yeah.
for Cryptic and I, who were like hardcore DPS racing dudes, right? Like, you needed every advantage that you could get, and if you were just working at a disadvantage, even if it was a small one, it was enough to feel like you really needed to do that. So yes, that's actually, Cryptic. It's an excellent question. For those of you who don't know, I very famously have raided for forever, more than any normal person should ever raid, and I never actually accomplished the legendary armor because it was a moot point for me. It was first of all, I was a raider, and it forced me, in order to get the best gear in the game, I had to do a bunch of stuff that wasn't raiding. It forced me to do things that I didn't want to do, and then in this theme park MMO where we were just complimenting it a moment ago about being able to get ascended gear in basically any game mode. In order to do legendary anything, you have to do a huge amount of stuff: farming, open world content, crafting, mystic forging, inventory stuff that I really don't want to do. And so it didn't give me a tangible advantage. It gave me sort of intangible convenience, and that wasn't enough for me. I had so many ascended pieces of gear falling out of my pockets, like I said, that I could just make every bit of gear that I ever needed. So I just never went through the process of making legendary armor. So yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I think the answer would be yes.
So I'm curious what you guys see as a middle ground, because for me, and again, this isn't about finding a solution, because there's no one solution that's going to make everyone happy, and there isn't a golden bullet that's going to solve everything. But I do think that we have a distinct lack of middle ground in the MMO space right now. We have Guild Wars 2 is at one
You
end,
mean
and
between
WoW's at the
hardcore
other.
and casual MMOs?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
I
We
agree.
have the two on the two sides and the two spectrums, and there's nothing. There are things in the middle, but they don't do it well in the middle. And personally, I feel like BDO has the best template for what a good middle ground system could be.
Here it comes. I was waiting for it. I was waiting for the BDO drop.
And I know when I say BDO, everybody immediately freaks out.
All right, guys, the stream is over. Thank you for watching. We'll be here next week on a non-BDO stream. I'm just kidding.
I know everybody freaks out and thinks RNG upgrades, terrible. I don't want to deal with it. Even pay to win, cash shop thinking mentality. That's not what I mean. I think those are the worst parts of BDO's progression system. There's joy to be found in it. There's a nice adrenaline rush when you hit that RNG upgrade and you're so happy.
You know that's also in Lost Ark, right?
Yeah, I figured.
The RNG upgrading.
Korean MMO, man. Welcome to the you're part of the system now.
I am. They got me, guys. They finally got me.
No, I do think that there's joy to be had in that, and I think that it should always be an option. But or not always, but I don't think there's any wrong with having it as an option. But what makes BDO's upgrade system, which by the way they have guaranteed upgrades now, you don't have to do the RNG anymore. But what makes BDO's upgrade system the good middle ground, in my opinion, is that not sponsored by Brilliant.
It's on to you.
When I leave BDO, like I don't have to play BDO right now. I'm taking a break. I'm not focused on playing it. And I'm playing other MMOs. When I come back to it in a month or 2 months or a year from now or 2 years from now, my gear will still be valid for all the content I want to do. Will it be behind other people? Slot? No, it won't be best in slot. It will not be best in slot. It's not best in slot right now. And even if it was in 2 months from now, it won't be best in slot when the expansion comes out. But it will still be valid for all that expansion content. I can go do all of that content and actually accomplish what I want to do. The new grind zones, the new dungeons, I can do all of that because BDO does small incremental progression with their gear. So when the new expansion comes out, we're getting a new helmet, which is not a brand new helmet. It's actually you take your old helmet and you'll kind of upgrade it, transform it into the new helmet. And that has better stats. We're getting 2 new gear item pieces. We're getting they're called alchemy slots or something. It's just basically two new slots are being added to the gear wheel, to your character thing. And they're going to give you HP, crit damage, some stuff like that. But me not having those doesn't mean I won't be able to beat someone in PvP. I'll have a disadvantage, but that doesn't mean I'm out of the game. And it doesn't mean in 2 months when I come back to the game that I won't be able to do the new dungeon when it comes out, or that I won't be able to do the new grind zone. Because
so does that more mean that gear is just less impactful overall to your character's potency in general?
No. Gear is super impactful. It's just that there's so many building blocks, and the way that they release those new building blocks is incremental? That you don't fall. If BDO came out with a whole new expansion that made all your progress wipe out, people would lose all their progress from the beginning of the game because it's incremental progress that makes the difference.
So would you compare it to then maybe in Guild Wars 2 terms, somebody wearing a full set of exotic gear and then the next expansion comes out and they release an Ascended helmet?
Yep.
Just a helmet? And then like little bits that are giving you stats, but not, it would take a very long time for it to be significant enough that it would bar you from new content or make you not competitive at all.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on I think it depends on the release content specifically. Like, I'd say this one coming out is more akin to like 3 or 4 pieces being exotic and then becoming Ascended. And then if they kept doing that every expansion, yeah, you would fall behind. And that's what does happen in some cases. But it's not always that drastic. This is a more drastic change than we've had previously, because we also got a new belt, which is giving us an AP increase. So this is a bit more of a more drastic change. But if you went away from Guild Wars 2 for a while and came back, and Legendary gear was like that upgrade between Exotic and Ascended, you would still be able to do all the raids just fine. It wouldn't have any impact. You would want to go get Legendary gear, right? You would be happy to go get Legendary gear. And you would grind for it and make sure all your characters had Legendary gear.
I might hate it. I might hate it, but I would actually do it.
You might hate it, but you would do it.
You got me. Yep.
And that's what it's like in BDO, is that, I mean, you don't hate it, by the way.
In BDO, you don't hate it.
Yeah, you don't hate it in BDO.
Guild Wars 2, I'm not a fan of legendary crafting of any kind. It's exhausting.
But the progression is there. You have things that you want to grind for, just like you'd want to get that legendary in BD or in Guild Wars 2 if it had stats. You want to do it in BDO, but you're not. The means of doing that is still there for you, right? Like you can still go do the grind zones and stuff like that, as opposed to in WoW, that new expansion comes out, all your gear is worse. That awesome legendary gear. Now, I'm not just talking about, the nice, cool things that drop for raids. I mean, the crazy things that, Tiffy was talking about, this legendary gear that she crafted to make like these daggers or whatever that are, like super awesome, tons of lore behind them. And then they're
the Warglaives of Azeroth, probably.
Yes, yeah. And then they're useless the next expansion. That's a legendary item that is now a paperweight. That's not the case at BDO. My legendary item, my Fallen God armor, is the best in slot armor in the game. And there's still things I can do to make it better, like tweak it and improve it, but it's not going to be invalidated. It'll be 3-4 years from now before it becomes invalidated.
So that speaks to something, right? Like maybe all gear could be improved over time. Maybe it doesn't get just replaced, but the idea that you managed to get something from like the highest level raid in a previous expansion, that you got to keep it and improve it as the new content comes out, that it still gives you some sort of tangible advantage because you managed to get that. I understand where you're coming from, and I think that, especially since you touched on the Warglaives of Azeroth, that is such like an essential element about this. It's not even just that you're getting really good gear and then you're trivializing it, but that gear was so cool and fancy beforehand, and now you're dropping it for like a rusty short sword, right? You're dropping the Warglaives of Azeroth that are rocked by Illidan himself, right? You are not prepared. It's got the big ass things, and you are dropping those in the next expansion to pick up the lamest rusty short sword because it's better stats.
You talk about going into the dungeon, having that D&D experience, right? Going into the dungeon.
This is what I wanted to bring up.
Yeah,
yes.
And you do with killing the boss, killing the dragon, all this, like at the end, you're on your knees at the end, barely making it. You get this awesome drop. You're so happy.
Yes.
And then a week later, the expansion comes out, and that legendary sword is now awful. It is a paperweight.
Right.
That experience is lost. It's gone. Why did you have that experience?
But you got to have it, right? So like this is because that's the trade-off. When you go to Guild Wars 2, you just don't get to have it.
Yeah.
Cryptic is talking about it's sort of like a meme, like it's a speech that I give on stream a lot because I feel really strongly about this. I think that itemization impacts not just mechanical systems like we're talking about, the roleplay immersion experience that goes into a collaborative, cooperative PvE MMO experience that you really need. MMO, as far as I've ever seen, is basically trying to make real the pen and paper experience of Dungeons and Dragons. It's been around since the 60s, right? Like, I'll play a warrior, you play a cleric, you play a wizard. We'll all make our characters as best we can, party up together, see how far we can battle our way into the bottom of the dungeon, and just see if our team can slay the dragon, right? Like, maybe we do. And if we do slay the dragon, oh my gosh, guess what? Behind the dragon was a hoard that it had been saving of a ton of gold and the flaming fiery axe of fiery decapitated dragon death. It's big and it's flaming and it's awesome, and like every time you attack, it has a chance of shooting a decapitated flaming dragon skull that shoots fire as it flies through the air. Really iconic experiences of an MMO experience. And if you rob the game but altruistically, you're trying to do something good for the player base, but if you end up dumbing down gear progression or itemization, I should say, so much that doesn't exist, you trivialize the game in general. Now, we've been talking about endgame and raids this whole time, but let's talk about just the regular game. About Guild Wars 2, that it is an amazing first playthrough MMO. If you've never played an MMO, it's going to be great. Even if you've played MMOs before, if you play Guild Wars 2, the very first time you play it is incredible. The world is expansive. It's immersive. You're like, hey, what's behind that waterfall? Like, there's so many games, right? In D&D, you're like, hey, Dungeon Master, what's behind the waterfall? Can we go? And like, there's probably going to be something behind there, or he'll make it so there is. The Warcraft, 99% chance there's nothing behind the waterfall. And if there is something behind the waterfall, it doesn't apply to you because you don't have the quest that sends you there intentionally. It's not a hidden gem. It's not a secret. The world isn't worth exploring, right? But in Guild Wars 2, it is. You might turn a corner and find some super secret, awesome freaking thing, or an entire huge jumping puzzle cavern that is amazing. Like, the experience of that in Guild Wars 2 is awesome. But, or the giant world bosses that you bump into, you're just going through the world, you're like, oh my gosh, what is that? There's something in the water, and you're just freaking out, right? This is a big experience of Guild Wars 2 until you are high level and you're an old jaded player who knows that it doesn't matter how cool it is, there's nothing in that chest. There's nothing behind that waterfall that's actually going to be tangibly worth it. No actual reward is going to be there, and that's because there's only 4 different types of gear in the whole game. There's like the green, the blue, the orange, the pink, and the only difference is a stat combination. There's no crazy cool rare thing that's not, you're not going to kill Tequatl and get like the Tequatl aquatic sword of typhoon summoning, like, that does something cool and changes the way your character plays.
I mean, Tequatl does have his own set. It's cosmetic
I mean, that's
only.
fair.
But it's nothing, right? It isn't anything. It doesn't actually make a difference. If you got those Warglaives of Azeroth in World of Warcraft that we were talking about, not only was it amazing, but it fundamentally changed your character. The way that it played, the strength of of your character was going to go through the roof. It might have some crazy, sick, awesome proc. There was a one-handed hammer or one-handed mace or something in the last expansion that turned a holy paladin, a total healer, into one of the top DPSs in the game because of its dramatic impact on the way that your character played. So these things are exciting. And I know that there's a bunch of baggage, just bad stuff that comes along with this. But if you are in that world and you do get your team together and you are raiding every week and you're gelling and you're progressing, right? Phoenix Uprising was talking about mentioning the lack of high-end prog, meaning that you have to come up with your own motivations. So that's definitely true. But when you're really working on that progression in a game that has it, and you finally defeat that dragon at the bottom of that dungeon, and he drops that thing that you've been wanting, and it changes your whole gameplay experience, and then you go to town, and you're like, hefted on your shoulder, and you're just walking through town, and people are like, holy crap, what is that? Like, there are experiences that you are trading for that convenience. That's always the argument I try to make. I'm not saying that Guild Wars 2 is not a good system. It fixes a lot of problems, but you are giving something up. And I think a lot of MMO gamers do not know, a lot of Guild Wars 2 gamers who have maybe only played Guild Wars 2 aren't even aware of what it is that they're giving up. And it is an iconic Dungeons and Dragons epic experience that I find myself missing more and more the longer I play games like Guild Wars 2.
But I think you could give up less of that with a middle ground and still have those experiences. Like you said, talking about, it doesn't just have to all be about stats, talking about like an item dropping. Like think of if runes in Guild Wars 2, right? If there were, instead of legendary runes, just letting you pick any one you want, if they were
hard and
they actually
cool and strong.
Well, no, they don't have to be stronger. They just dramatically changed your play style.
Yeah.
You know, and for the new elite spec, instead of having 1 golem, you lose some of your abilities, but you get 10 golems now.
Yep,
now you're this golem mancer play style, right?
That would do this. That would do it. In fact, that actually speaks to some of the interesting things about Guild Wars 2 itemization, right? Is that the difference in gear is actually nothing. It's menial rarity difference, right? 2 more strength, 2 more precision, 3 more ferocity. That's it.
Think infusions. One
difference is actually comes in the form of runes, which is basically like adding, for those of you who don't play Guild Wars 2, it just adds a set bonus. It adds a set bonus to the gear that you're wearing. The problem is that these are trivial. They cost nothing. They're incredibly easy to get, and the best in slot of all of them, they're all passive, right? Like, yeah, there's a set of runes that summons a parrot that sits on your shoulder. When you use an elite skill, you shout, "Arr!" And then it summons a parrot and it sits on your shoulder. Like, that sounds cool, but you don't see the parrot, you don't hear the R, and it doesn't actually change the way that you play. It also is not best in slot. Best in slot stuff, there's like what, 3 total rune sets, and that's like it, right?
Yeah.
And so people at any given time, and I'm just speaking for DPS, and they're all basically just a different formation of stat bonuses, like that might benefit this build versus that build, and they're passive and they're easy to get, so they are completely trivial. It takes everything away. Would they be able to fix itemization? And I've always answered that question with no. But Cryptic brings up the point that you could do a roundabout fix on this by reworking runes, and maybe sigils, right? Which is basically runes for weapons. There would be a way to do that, and that would be interesting. That would be an interesting idea.
Yeah.
One of the other questions we had actually in chat from a bit ago was, what are your thoughts on a game that has a permanent increase to stats, though? And would that lend itself to something like this?
What do you mean a permanent increase to
I'm
stats?
assuming it meant like where you just permanently have upgrades and there's always the potential for an increase of stats.
So I think like an endless. I'm trying to think. There's lots of games that do this, but like games when you get to like a level cap of like 60. After that, like in STO we get specialization points, right? Instead of a specialization point, you get 1 attribute point, and that attribute point raises strength +1, and you can keep doing that endlessly. Strength +2. Or you just get 1 every level. I mean, and it goes on. Actually, BDO actually kind of has something like this. There is no level cap. It's just so each level after like 62 takes forever, and when you level up, you get a small stat increase. And so I think the highest I've ever seen a player is like 66 or 67. But that you could go on and on if you wanted to. And it doesn't have to be that hard. The levels can be relatively the same. The curve doesn't have to ramp up that much. But you just get the tiniest of smallest, most infinite stat increases. But it lets you keep doing it forever.
Okay, so that's a good point, and that's what it brings up what we talked about a little while ago with maybe the concept of not replacing gear that you got, but continually upgrading it. And I think that at that point, what you're actually doing is there's still creep, right? There's still increase. That's a term that MMOs use to describe an incremental increase in overall player power over time that can come from gear or like Paragon level types of alternate advancement functions in the end. Yep. or new elite specs needing to be stronger than the previous, all these things. Like you eventually things just get stronger over time. Even in Guild Wars 2, the average dude, like I said, that the gear has been the same since 2 years in, right? Since they came out with Ascended with Fractals. The gear is exactly the same, but how much stronger is the average player? Way stronger, right? Creep has just happened passively, but this would be intentional creep that rewards time invested, right? So like Cryptic, who's been playing for 2 years and I haven't been playing for 2 years, that means he's still much stronger than me when I come back. But it does mean, well, 2 years worth of doing this, it would make a difference at that point, even if it's 1 stat, for each thing.
I guess you're right.
Now I have a question.
But it doesn't actually make you remove or throw away previous investment. It might mean you're behind, but when new content comes out, it means that you don't actually trash everything that you had done up until that point, right?
Now that seems good, like in the sense that it does give people like a purpose and motivation to continually play a game if you're getting those slight stat increases. But how does that dismantle the competition for things like DPS? Like, I mean, a big part of Guild Wars 2, people race for those DPS numbers. And how would that unbalance that? Wouldn't that make that it's no longer just about skill anymore, is it? It's about who's been logging into the game every day for the last 2 years. So how do you think that would affect people's, like, the way they look at DPS meters, the way they look at that? And would it even then be worth it would that dismantle that entire part of the game?
It's a really good question, and I think that we've already seen that, because in terms of that's basically what you get with a regular gear treadmill game. In Guild Wars 2, remember I said that the moment that you walk into a raid, the sentence I said was that the moment you walk into a raid, you're as good geared as you will be as the moment that you finish every raid boss 100 times. So you're going to be exactly the same gear. But the other half of that card is to say that the moment that you walk into raids, you are equally prepared and on the same level to compete with every other person in the raid that you're with, regardless of how long they've been raiding, right? That's like the weird other side of that. So you're not really having to deal with it. But that again is the departure. That is not the norm. That was the departure from the norm. The norm is what you were talking about. That's actually what people did in MMOs before that, and in most MMOs to date
Well, no,
are
I mean, what
that
about
their
the
gear.
MMOs that don't do those little micro progressions that we were talking about, like that continuous progression? The other thing, like with WoW, for instance, yeah, there is a potential that you can eventually get the best gear, but with those like micro increases, there's no way to catch up, right? Like
Right,
that would
Yeah,
no. You're talking about being behind in something like a login reward that you could
there would
never catch up
you'd
on. Yeah,
never be able to
that would be
catch up to that.
terrible. That
Yeah.
system would never work. No one would
well,
like that. There would have to be a way to catch up.
yeah, and like Julinar in chat is reading my mind. The problem with the infinite +1 stats in an MMO is that there is no good way to allow players to catch up. MMOs have catch up mechanics, and pretty much every MMO has some form of a catch up mechanic. And the reason why BDO's infinite stat isn't a problem is because it's such a minute, negligible thing. Getting past 63 is like a huge achievement, or not a huge achievement, but like it's hard. It takes a long time, and it's just a lot of time investment. And the people that are at level 65, 66 on their characters, it just doesn't matter. It's cool that they put in all that time and effort and all that grinding to get that high, but the experience, or the few little stats they got from that, isn't going to make a difference in the grinding, isn't going to make a difference in PvP. It's just a personal achievement thing. And the reason that they do it like that and don't assign more value to those stats is that um, there's no way for them to implement a catch-up mechanic to that wouldn't negatively impact the people that have already done that. And you might say, oh, but gear catch-up mechanics negatively impact people that have the gear. Again, as an example, in BDO has a gear catch-up mechanic. It's true, but people have come to expect and accept that there's always going to need to be a catch-up mechanic for new players coming in. And as their gear progresses, that older gear that is more useless, that is used for the catch-up mechanic, it's not something that, at least in my experience, it's not something that bothers people on a face value if a new player is given some of that older gear, because they're still going to have to grind up to that. They're still going to have to put in a relatively the same amount of time as the person that is at the top level of gear. But if a new player was given 4 levels and is now 64 and is only 2 levels behind that level 66 player, that is now like a big, I think most players would be like, whoa, I put in so many hours into this. This isn't gear that they just got lucky that, that like it could drop or whatever, or they got a lucky RNG upgrade.
It was an investment the whole time.
Yeah, this was an investment of time that you took away from me. I could have not played, came back, and basically been in the same place I am now, as opposed to with gear, if I don't play and I come back, well, I have some small catch-up mechanics here to help me get in a more competitive state, but I'm still behind these other people. And that will always be the case every time I take a break, as opposed to coming back and now suddenly I've been given levels or stats to catch up.
Azure says if Guild Wars 2 announced a rework like Cryptic's suggestion, I would start logging in again more than once a month.
I think he's talking about the
runes and sigils.
Yeah,
I can touch on what Phoenix Uprising said. Doesn't BDO have a RNG based enhancement through that you can lose a lot of resources at once? Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, and I just looked this up. It is also in Lost Ark, but there is a mercy mechanic, so that if you fail enough times in a row, it ends up becoming 100% chance that you will
sort of
succeed.
exists in BDO as well, though. It's not
the same thing.
Yeah, it's not the rarer and like the more you're pushing the stats of a gear. Like BDO has tiers of gear. It goes from 0 to 15, and then after 15 it becomes Tri, Duo, Tri, Tet, and Pen. And Pen is the highest. And once you start getting into those Duo, Tri, Tet, and Pens, you can't really get 100% chance. I mean, you can, but like the stack would be impossible to make. And that's the mechanic that lets you start building stacks, and the stack is the bigger the stack, the higher the percentage chance of the enhancement succeeding. I will say though that I'm hoping that Lost Ark's RNG isn't as punishing as BDO's. BDO's, when it came out, or at least in the West originally, was very punishing. It has since relaxed, and like I said, there is guaranteed mechanics where you can skip the RNG entirely and still get nearly end game. Like, I mean, it is all end game, but I mean like nearly top level. Like you'd just be a tiny little bit behind where the end game is, the 1% of people, the 0.5% of people. But aside from that, I will say the RNG thing's kind of like a trap. It's not like, people see RNG in BDO and in Lost Ark, and they say, "Oh, look at this RNG upgrade system. This is bad. This is not something that I want to be a part of." But in every other Gear Treadmill MMO, you're a part of an RNG system. You just don't see it. BDO and Lost Ark present it to you. They show you the number and they say, look at this percentage that look at how many times you have to click this to get your gear. Whereas WoW, I mean, obviously the numbers are higher, the drop rate is higher, but there's still RNG. It's the drop rate. The drop rate is your RNG. It's just a difference of where you put it, where you show the player.
And it used to be so much different. So for those of you guys who don't know, this is how it was back in the day. Not only did everyone have to come into raids, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, everyone came into raids to that first raid boss completely undergeared and underprepared. And you needed to down that boss over and over again to get everyone gear, to up their overall gear score to make the boss more easily done. Loot was shared. So you would down a boss and it would drop maybe 3 or 4 things for a team of 20. And then everyone had to divvy that up. You remember stories of people like ninja looting and running, right? Oh, there it is. No Point said it. DKP stands for Dragon Kill Points. Now, a little bit of history for those of you who are interested. It was a crazy time. In order for people to make a system where this was fair with their guild members, they created something called DKP. And for those of you who might have heard DKP minus from the old WoW memes back in the day, meant was that every week, if you showed up for the raid, you got like 5 DKP. You showed up for, you got 5 DKP. And then when an item would drop, an officer in the guild would start typing in guild chat and say, taking bids on the flaming fiery axe of dragon decapitation. And then they would end up saying, taking bids on this, and then they would post a silent bidding auction where they would say it's up to 10, it's up to 15. So you didn't know who you were bidding against, and you were bidding your DKP that they kept on a spreadsheet. So the more you helped the guild, the more that you showed up for raids, the more points you had to spend, and then you would get a good piece of gear if you won the bidding, but then you would have to wait a long time to get enough DKP saved up again. So like the evolution of itemization, even in WoW, because that's how WoW was at the beginning, and now it is drastically different. Everyone sees their own loot. No one can ninja loot. You get a random bit of gear that the boss can drop, and it goes directly to you. You don't have to bid on it, but the difference is that it is still RNG, right? You still may have to do something. You may need those Warglaives of Azeroth, and it might take you 50 times to get something, and you never got it. So, God, Cryptic has been swallowed by a black hole.
I was actually just about to say, No Point in chat was talking about, I think, BDO, the fact that with those permanent stat increases, that there are other systems that also require huge time investment. There's like increased attributes and skills, stat increases with reincarnation mechanics. So I'd let, when Cryptic gets back, maybe he can speak on this a little bit, but it seems like that is something that does kind of run away from you and is probably makes it difficult for new players to feel like they can be competitive.
Well, that's a huge deal in MMOs, right? Like, MMOs always want new people to come and play them. Mm-hmm. MMOs are a really weird genre.
I am glad that No Point said something. He did not say mean BDO. He meant
DDO, Dungeons and Dragons
Online.
Yeah, so MMOs are a very strange genre in general. Player base that ends up shifting around all the time from one game to another game to the newest game, go back to their favorite game. This kind of happens all the time. So MMOs are always trying to get new players to come and try their game. But the longer a game has been out, the harder it is for a player to go and try it, right? Like if someone were to try Guild Wars 2 right now, that's the advice that they give on stream constantly. Somebody will come and they'll be like, hey, how is this game? Is it good? Should I play it? It's old, right? Like, it's been around. Like, is it a good time to come back? And I'm like, listen, the first thing you need to know about Guild Wars 2 is that you're not in any rush, right? Don't feel like you need to race up to max level so that you can enjoy the content. Otherwise it'll be trivial. Doesn't matter that you're 10 years late to this game. By the time you get to endgame, it's still going to be there. And the moment that you walk into endgame content, you are on the same level as everyone else. But they don't know that that's true. And so most modern MMOs have to deal with that. Like, how do we make it so that 10 years in, a new player can come and not feel like they're too late to be competitive? So if they were to do a system like that, an incremental increase, they would have to do it really well. And they'd have to make that very clear, because it's intimidating.
we actually have a system like that. STO has permanent stat increases over time, which is the Endeavor system.
Mm.
And honestly, that's the worst part of the game, in my opinion. You have the slow progression of, I mean, it's not endless stat increases, but it's the slow progression of tiny stat increases that you get from doing objectives in the game, and you can only do a certain amount every day, and you have to come back every day.
He said
And
STO, which is Star Trek Online.
Star Trek Online, yes. And there's no catch up mechanic for that. There shouldn't be a catch up mechanic for that because it's a time investment thing. Only time. There's nothing else involved with it. It's pure time. And that just feels bad. It feels bad for the people that are behind in it. Like, I have almost no investment in the Endeavor system because I don't log in every day. And honestly, it feels bad for people that are ahead in that because it's just time that they've invested for a minute stat increase. I don't know. That doesn't feel like that was worthwhile time spent in a game.
Do you think it affects endgame in STO? Because I know I've
Uh,
always, when I played STO and when I play STO, I just always assume there really is no competitive endgame. And maybe that could be part of that reason right there.
So
there is a
STO is
competitive.
weird. STO is hard to compare to other games because as I said before, like there's a big pool of MMO players who sort of bounce from game to game. Star Trek Online exists outside of that universe. 99% of people who are playing that game are not MMO players looking for the new fun MMO to play. They are Star Trek nerds who are just happy to be playing around in the Star Trek world. That said, there is a means in which you can parse your DPS and do challenging gameplay at the end, but again, you have to force yourself to do that. It's actually not incentivized in a huge way. It doesn't define your end game experience. It doesn't lock any content behind your ability to be perfectly geared and do all this damage. So typically it's different.
I think the biggest evidence that the Endeavor system is meaningless is that whenever I watch a video about a build for endgame stuff, the Endeavor system is never mentioned. Nobody is ever like, you need to invest these points in the Endeavor system for this build to be viable, or to do this amount of DPS, or to tank these mobs. It's never mentioned because it's just impossible to know at what level someone's at what level how long it will take them to get there, and the stats overall don't have the impact to actually make that big of a difference. A single console in STO, which is like a piece of gear, means more, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not an end game expert, but means more, in my opinion, than if you had every Endeavor thing maxed out. And I just don't. This is why I think permanent stat increases over time don't work and aren't good solutions for, the gear treadmill problem, if you want to call it that. What I'm looking forward to in new MMOs is epic legendary drops in raids and dungeons and stuff like that that are one, not necessarily always gear and stat dependent, that are gameplay changing, that are and also not just cosmetic is awesome, obviously, but change the way your character plays, and then also for a gear progression system, again, sort of kind of like BDO, where when I leave the MMO and come back, my gear is still valid to do the raid that just came out. It's just not optimal, and I'm behind other people. And I may have missed out on that really awesome, rune that lets this person play a dragon hunter as an archer or as a dual sword wielder, or something like that, or lets a dragon hunter summon a dragon instead of, hey, I missed out on that. I wasn't playing the game. I missed out on it. Maybe it'll come back at some point. Who knows? That's on me.
Oh, well, now you're touching multiple other sore spots here. Like, so World of Warcraft is famous for that. They'll come out with something really cool.
Yeah.
Like exactly in the way that you were talking about. And then they'll make it not obtainable.
Yeah.
Ever again. Or not for years.
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with that? A lot of people freak out. In fact,
as long as it comes back at some point in the future. It could be 2-3 years. I just want it to come back at some point.
An example of that just happened in the world of Warcraft. In fact, they brought back the Mage Tower experience. If anyone played WoW back in Legion, they brought back the Mage Tower, which is probably one of the coolest things that I've ever seen in an MMO. I mean, I will give WoW the credit it's due, and I also rag on WoW for the problems that exist in it. But one of the best things I've ever seen in an MMO was the Mage Tower in World of Warcraft. This was single player content, single player instanced dungeon-esque content. Bloody hard. I mean, like sweaty. Try for days and days and days, weeks of effort trying to do this hard and really challenging that was unique to the class that you were playing, right? So like if you were a warrior, you would have a different experience than a healer. A healer would actually walk in and have a healing experience where they needed to keep people alive and it was super challenging. Or a tank needed to gather aggro and protect an NPC. And interrupt effects and position perfectly and all this stuff. I mean, they designed them for the role and made them really challenging. And they brought back a bit of cosmetic change that was supposed to never come back ever. And a lot of people went nuts when they did that because they were like, I did this back then and I was supposed to be never obtainable again. And I'm so mad that other people are getting this now. And then other people were like, oh my gosh, finally I get an opportunity to get this thing. It was basically, if you were a druid, you could shapeshift into a bear. This changed your bear shapeshift form into something very distinct, very werewolf-like. It was really cool. That was never obtainable again. And I can tell you, that exact concept stopped me from making a druid. Walking around in that thing and I was like, dude, if I ever make a druid, I'm never going to be able to be that. I don't want to do it. And so like that actually was, again, it's well-intentioned, but it also can really thwart someone's enjoyment of a game. We all remember in Guild Wars 2, right? When the idea of living worlds chapters was first unveiled. They called it that because it was supposed to be a living, breathing world that would have events occur in the world live and then go away and change to the next event, and it would never be doable again. One season.
Well, right. In theory,
People
that
hated
sounds
it.
really good, right? But I have to
I
say,
loved it.
in Guild Wars 2, when that first thing that they did with whatever her name is, I can't remember now.
Myatrin.
Yeah, with
Mytrin,
that
yeah.
whole thing. Like I was not
it
Mytrin,
was
the Scarlet.
Scarlet. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I was
The
so
creepy
upset.
Sylvari.
I was so upset that I missed that because it was for such a short period of time, and that like haunted me for so long. So to be fair, like I don't
Scarlet
know
Briar.
if in practicality that would just cause too much angst
That was-
from people.
That was the best living world content we ever got.
Oh,
though.
Scarlet
the invasion of
Briar.
the invasion of Lion's Arch was the best one. So I feel like it kind of fights against your argument here. Like the best one we ever got.
Well,
was
okay,
also the one
that is
doesn't
subjective.
stand
That's
Is it the
subjective.
best,
But
or
I
is
would
it just
say
the best because it was gone and it was
it
something that
was
people can't do anymore?
No.
So it has like this
the
like
best.
this thing around it, this rosy colored glasses here.
I believe it's both, and mostly because they were doing it in the way they were doing it. They had made it not instance content. They changed Lion's Arch. They changed open world zones. There were big dramatic things that were happening because it was supposed to be what was happening in the world right now.
Yep.
Now, they could fix all that by doing that kind of thing and then making it instanced later. So that could still be done, but it was never done after that. They decided people felt like they missed out. Junie and I were like, that was when we were getting married. We missed it. Neither of us played season 1. To date, I don't really get that experience. I had to go back and watch like YouTube videos of it and stuff. So you sort of missed out. To bring up in terms of what you were talking about, Cryptic, is you said that cosmetic stuff is awesome. Now, if you were to look like, yeah, we talk about itemization or incentive to do content. Some of it is that like in classic MMO experience, you would get the best in slot, strongest, most potent gear from raid content or from the most challenging stuff that would make you stronger. In Guild Wars 2, they don't do that. And the couple of examples where content is still sort of exciting to do is when there's some sort of small chance of locking some sort of cool cosmetic thing behind a raid. Now, Professor Mai was in chat bringing up the difference of Final Fantasy. Fantasy does have some elements of getting gear from bosses, but you can get it in lots of other ways. You also like get a set amount of currency like magnetite shards that you can spend at vendors to get reliable gear without the RNG. You can also craft to get that stuff. But what Final Fantasy does really, really well, and World of Warcraft also does well. This is something that is really cool because all previous content, while it may be trivialized in a practical way, people still go back and do it all the time. And why? And it's because there are cool cosmetic things that are locked behind content. So it doesn't, even in Guild Wars 2, where there is no way to really fix their itemization issue, and I would say that the vast majority of Guild Wars 2 players wouldn't even want it changed, right? I would say that they like that system where you can get the best in slot gear from anywhere. The times where and I had complained that you check behind the waterfall, right, and see this big thing, and it's really cool, but you know at the end of that jumping puzzle, you're going to get a chest that has nothing in it. Like 3 blues and an unidentified gear. Like, yay. Like, it's absolutely garbage. But the elements that they fix that issue in are the very few instances where you could get something rare and cool and shiny, even if it isn't practical. And Final Fantasy does this a lot too, in the way of maybe dropping... In Final Fantasy WoW, it's mounts. Like the coolest mount skins in the game don't come from the gem store. They come from raid bosses and stuff, right? Like you can get something that isn't even applicable to the power creep or the treadmill or whatever, just stuff that's cool, right? Like the Mage Tower I just brought up, super hard to do, super challenging. It got you an augment to a class, like the Druid could augment its ability to be something totally different looking, which is super cool. Or if you completed it on everything, you got a totally rad, completely rare and flex worthy mount that showed that you accomplished this super difficult task, right? I mean, it was a flex to show off this mount because holy crap, was that challenging. In Guild Wars 2, there's some infusions, right? And I would say infusions is probably it, but they're so rare that it's not enough. But like, I'll give you the example that I always think about. And that is, do you remember back when Heart of Thorns first came out? We all hit Verdant Brink. The very first time I ever saw the Light Ward Battle Staff. Do you know what that staff is? You know what I'm talking about? It is a like light blue and gold staff that has a blade at the end. It's kind of like a Naginata kind of weapon. That you would see in like a Chinese weapon, but it's basically Daredevil came out with that expansion, and this was the first staff ever. Thank you, Azure, best staff ever, right? This staff was the first staff that you saw that was clearly intentionally made to be melee. It had a freaking blade at the end of it. It wasn't a caster staff. When you were Daredevil, that was the very first time that staves were used in a melee way. So you were wielding these big wizard staves and twirling them around like this, ninja. It made no sense. But the Light Ward Battle Staff was this awesome skin, and you had a chance of getting it from the airship containers, the airship part containers in Verdant Brink. So I would save up like all of my freaking pry bars and run around trying desperately to get that staff. It was content. It was incentive. It was fun. It was cool. I was excited as hell when I first got it out of that thing. And that was like, did that make me stronger? No, of course not. But it made me cooler. And in Guild Wars 2, we all accept we're playing the game to get cooler. And so they actually put stuff in the game that was incentive. It was rare enough that it kept me going, right? And it was rewarding enough that I was super excited. And that's everything you kind of want from an MMO experience. If to go and do the Pinata event in noon every day, trying to get the freaking confetti infusion, like as if you're gonna get that. Like it exists, and I guess, but it's not enough to keep me doing it every day. You know what I mean? It's not fun.
Well, yeah. I have a question with Maddox actually mentioned in chat. What do you think about gearing for solo players, like people who don't raid because they don't want to be in a big group, and there is a whole contingency of players that are solo players in MMOs?
That is the ultimate question, right? I think that is why Guild Wars 2 exists, and that is what Guild Wars 2 is designed for. Cryptic and I think Cryptic I'll let you talk in a sec, but I think Cryptic agrees with me here that as we can sit here and complain about all of these systems that we wish were different in Guild Wars 2, the fact is, at the end of the day, Guild Wars 2 is not meant for me or that guy down there. It was designed for that person who's playing solo content, who wants to be able to do everything. Like they can only play an hour a day. They don't have a guild that's raiding. They don't want to be sitting for hours at a time working on their DPS rotations so they can do hardcore raiding. And they want to be able to accomplish every bit of the game that they would like to do, right? Like no story is locked behind raid bosses, and gearing doesn't matter to a point where it'll stop you from doing any living world story, any solo content, any open world events, any achievement hunting. None of that stuff requires that of you. So the game is really meant for people like Maddox is talking about, not for Cryptic.
Yeah. No, I mean I agree. I will say that like I think solo gearing stuff can be done in other MMOs even with the gear treadmill, and I think the solution to that is that gear being listable on marketplaces so you can farm for gold in solo experiences. You know, whether that's crafting or I mean, you know, I don't play WoW so I don't know, but like in Guild Wars 2 you would farm, you know, materials and you could craft things to sell, and you know you could do other content without having to necessarily be organized, but there are people around you helping you, like events and stuff like that, and you could attain money that way, and then you could, you know, purchase your, I know you can't buy ascended gear in Guild Wars, but if it was listable you could buy ascended gear, and I think, you know, that kind of thing in another MMO would work. And also honestly, you know, and I don't think crafting gear works for best in slot, because inevitably what that ends up doing is anything that's craftable has to be sellable in most cases. And on top of that, even if it's not sellable, the way materials end up flooding a market in an MMO, people will just be able to churn out gear way too quickly.
And that's Guild Wars 2, right? Because
Yeah, it's Guild
the
Wars
way
2.
that the little materials flood a market is insane. The whole
But
game is built around that.
in WoW, if you had that super awesome rare legendary drop and you could sell it for 1 billion gold, and someone solo could grind for that gold and buy that item, I think that's acceptable.
So you're speaking about WoW, and you sort of imagined that might be true. And I can tell you as a WoW player that some of the biggest money moving that goes around in World of Warcraft is from the rare and good BOE, or bind on equip items.
Yeah.
So like the better BOE items, because most things in modern MMOs, right? And this wasn't always the case. Back in EverQuest days, you could down a raid boss and get a super awesome weapon and then give it to your level 10 and have him wreck everything. Like that was twinking, is what we called it. You would twink your lower level alts and make them super strong. And that was actually like a really fun element of the game. And get all these cool rare things and then make a brand new character, make him super overpowered. It was like New Game Plus. That stuff was cool. But in WoW, modern WoW, the best stuff you can ever get in the game is account bound on pickup. But the better, like there's a lot of really rare drops that come from high level dungeons and things like that that are BOE. And those are highly sought after because that's where the money is at. And it's specifically for that, for the people who don't raid, who want to play WoW. Right? They want to play and enjoy the game. Those are like the best things that they can get. They can craft up to a certain point. They can get these rare BOEs, making money and buying the stuff off the trading post. And that is sort of like the best gear that they can get.
Yeah, I think
that WoW is different. It funnels you into raiding. It's not even just for the people that like to raid. What I always say is like Arthas, right? The Lich King. I think I got him right here. Hold on.
Hey, just pick up Raz. That's fine.
I know, right? Here's Arthas. Arthas, the Lich King, is a very popular villain in the realm of WoW, and the expansion came out, beloved by all. He's straight from Warcraft 3, right? And sure enough, the expansion comes out. Arthas is taking over Northrend. He's sending out all of the Scourge everywhere, and everything's really bad. And you could do all this story in the expansion to check out like everything that's happening. But if you want to kill Arthas, if you want the final chapter in that story, if you want to find out what happens when he dies, who kills him, all the cutscene and all that, that is locked behind raiding. It would be like in Guild Wars 2, you do the entire thing, the corruption is spreading across Tyria, you find out the Elder Dragons are loose, and if you want to kill Zaitan at the end of the personal story, you need a 20-man raid, and it's super hard, and only 5% of people can do it. Like, that's the way that game was built. So yes, in most games, I think like the question about soloing is different in Guild Wars 2 than it is in the World of Warcraft.
Now we're probably going to have to start wrapping up soon, but I do have a couple more questions from chat. No Point says, "What are your thoughts on account bound rewards versus character bound rewards?"
Cryptic?
Well, I was kind of reading what he said here. He said bind on account of pickup. I think what you're talking about, bind on equip, right? I'm not a big fan of account on pickup unless it's some kind of weird specific, you know. I don't know, like take the Gen 2 legendaries in Guild Wars 2. I never liked that you couldn't sell them on the TP. I thought that was disincentivizing people to craft them and make them, and we see less of them in the world because of that. Maybe that's a good thing, but
I was just gonna say, I think a lot of people would consider that a good thing. I think that there's a lot of people that feel like the trading of legendary tier 1 was a mistake, was an error.
potentially. I mean, the ArenaNet obviously feels like it's not because it's coming back with
Shocking. Yeah, I heard that that's true. That's kind of crazy.
I don't know. I versus character bound rewards. I think that it depends on the MMO, right? Like, I guess the crux of your question is, should everything be account bound or should everything be character bound? If it's an MMO that encourages making alts, like we've been playing Star Trek Online, Guild Wars 2, these are MMOs that encourage making alts. I think everything should be account bound.
Lost Ark.
Yeah, Lost Ark. Everything should be account bound. You should not be restricting things to the character. I understand that it's a way to get people to regrind things, but if you really want to do that for certain specific things, you make them class specific, like certain gear, like weapons, are class specific only. But the majority of things, especially cosmetic stuff, should be cosmetic stuff should be account wide. When we're playing Star Trek Online, we all love it when a ship that we get is account wide, right? Like, we are so happy about
hate
that.
it when it's not. It actually
Hate it when
like
it's not.
screws up a lot of your enjoyment of the game when you can't.
Exactly. So
I
if a
completely
game,
agree with that. I love account bound items.
And wouldn't you say that that is another element that separates Guild Wars 2 from most MMOs? That's the other thing when people say, like, what, is this game good? What's cool about it? That inevitably comes up. Everything you ever do is account bound. Your achievements, your die unlocks, your outfits, your every bit of appearance that you ever get, the entirety of the Fashion Wars system, and the best in slot gear is all account wide. So when people are like, "Oh God, what should I make? Like, what's the best class right now? What should I play?" I'm like, relax, play everything. By the time you're done, you're gonna have everything, and then you're gonna have like the ability to trade like everything you ever put into that warrior. When you decided, I hate warriors now, I'm gonna play a guardian.
Well, right,
everything is transferable.
Because modern MMOs, it's not EverQuest. You're not only playing one character anymore, and it's just frustrating to not have things be account bound.
I like to propose a solution that will never happen.
I was hoping you were gonna propose a toast.
Yes. EVE Online doesn't have anything that is bound. Nothing is bound. Everything is not just account wide, but it's an item that exists, or ship or whatever the case may be, that has a value and that you can sell in a marketplace. It's a player run economy. And the economy is so well tuned and looked after that every piece of gear that you have, there's no reason to restrict it from you literally giving it. You could give it to someone else. You could sell it. You could blow it up, destroy it, whatever the case may be. There's no reason there's just no reason to restrict it, because that is a decision that a person is making in an economic sense. Just like in real life, if I went over and I bought, these headphones, and I was like, "Hey, Merrick, here's these headphones." That's an economic decision that I made. I took money out of my pocket and then I gave that item to someone else. And there's no reason for the government to be like, "You bought that. You cannot give that to Merrick TV. He does not deserve that." And I like that in a game. I feel like, I know that's an incredibly ambitious thing for a game to try to tackle, and I mean, EVE is really the only one that's ever been able to do that.
Yeah, well, let's put it in a realm where we're all comfortable comparing it. So if you were to kill, a big raid boss in an MMO, get like the big flaming fiery axe of decapitated Dragon Doom. And then you could like trade it, right? I'm like, here, Junie, have this.
Its special ability is that its name transmutes.
Or sometimes it's not even an axe. So like, if that were the case, and I could just toss that to Junie over here, who totally doesn't deserve it and doesn't raid. She's super mean to people, doesn't deserve to raid. I'm just kidding. I love you, honey.
I had to look in the opposite direction so that it wouldn't look funny on screen.
Oh, do I have you back? Oh, Discord reverses
No, there's no
you.
way to do it. This is the correct way, otherwise everything's mirrored.
Okay. Judy's super mean? What? Would you support that? Would you think that that's a good idea? Like, not legendary crafting, right? That's a different thing. We're all investing stuff and materials. We're basically crafting something. It should be tradable, sure. But like, what about something locked behind like competitive, difficult, collaborative raid content? Okay with trading that?
Yeah. I seriously, like in Eve Online, not to bring it back to Eve, but it's the same. Look, like back like your example in Guild Wars 2. If I go and I kill Zaitan in a raid and he drops
Mhm.
Zaitan's awesome sword, I can just get. I should just be able to give that away to someone. The value of that should be that the cost benefit analysis of me making that decision has an impact on me. So this sword is worth 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 gold in Guild Wars 2. I just lost that gold because I gave it away to someone else, right? That should
Well,
be an option
or
that you
you
go,
didn't give it, you sold it, and you
or
gained
I
two
sold it and I
thousand gold.
gained
So
2,000 gold. Yeah.
I guess that sort of brings it back to another hot button issue in a lot of games, and I think people probably feel pretty strong about that. But like raid selling, for example, right? People who have not defeated the raid but are being carried through for large amounts of gold. This basically is that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
the same version of that. Like it's just Guild Wars 2 is super weird. There's no cool gear locked behind raids, except for what can be gotten just for clearing them.
Mhm.
And so for raid selling, it's kind of the same thing. Do you feel like raid selling or being able to sell all of the gear that comes to raids trivializes the accomplishment and therefore brings down the coolness or significance of raids in general, or do you think
Yeah,
that doesn't
definitely.
affect it at all?
No, it definitely does, and that's another side of the argument. I think you're right. It definitely lowers the achievement, and being able to give that item away to other people definitely means that somebody that has that sword, who knows if they bought it, right? Who knows if someone gave it to them for
Yeah.
free? I know. I think you're right. I think
I'm
the
going to pin you down right now because I happen to know that my good friend Cryptic here, there are people in this world where Cryptic has been like, that dude is rocking the Voice in the Void. Probably doesn't deserve to be rocking Voice in the Void. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that Voice in the Void title is the most sought after, biggest flexing title that
Mhm.
you can get out of raiding. It's the thing that shows I'm the biggest, baddest raider around. There's nothing more significant than that to show
Mhm.
your raiding prowess. And there are people where you come across them and you're like, how did you get that title, right? Like
Mhm.
and for those of us who spent months working on it, like it's not that we're just big mean jerks or being elitist. Element of like butt off for that, and I really did. I put so much work into training myself so that I was good enough. Getting the gear, and then once I was good enough, finding a team and investing social energy into getting a good team together. And then we spent week after week after week working on this progression. And then somebody who just sort of like waltzes in and gets carried through to victory and then sports that title. There's an element of like, maybe it's not worth as much now, and it kind of bums you
Yeah,
out.
but
So
But
can't that happen in any situation? I mean, like Angie said in chat, some people are putting in a little bit more than others just as
absolutely
that
true.
happens naturally. And
yes.
somebody may die halfway through the fight in that specific run, and that's the run that it wins, and now they have the title. Like
Well, I
that's
would
going
argue
to
that that's
happen.
not the issue. Like that person isn't representative of what I'm trying to describe. But it definitely is because they put the effort in. They just happen to die on that particular poll. That's a bummer.
Something, Merrick. If that, because right now I don't know what the price is for Doom CM, but I'm guessing the price for Doom CM is like 100 gold or
Do you
less,
know why
right?
you don't know? Because raid sellers won't tell you.
Tell you? Oh, really?
Oh, dude, every time I've ever, because I have a lot of raid seller friends, and I
Yeah.
like, you ask them, and you're like, so what is it? What's a CM run go for these days? And they're like, a lot. And then they won't tell you because you're not interested. They don't want those numbers being passed around. They try to feel out someone for like how serious and how rich they are. If they have the
Yeah.
money, then they'll take it a step forward. But that's why you'll always see people advertising raid sells and they
Mhm.
never drop prices. They're like
Yeah.
best prices around, but it's like you don't know what it is. I've been raiding for years and I've never gotten someone to tell me what it is because they know, every one of them knows I'm not good. I'm not buying. I'm not in the market. So they won't tell me. I've yet to find out what that
Yeah.
costs.
Well, I mean, my question to you would be: would you still feel like, oh, there's someone that doesn't deserve Voice in the Void if that person, if it was restricted, the people that could buy it were restricted to like the Enkos of the world, and they dropped 20,000 gold to get it because that was their way of earning the achievement. They played the game their way, played it extraordinarily well, became the Baron of all barons, and used that to get the title. would you feel like it was trivialized at that point?
or played real life well enough that they got real life money and then spent it on gems to convert that
Right.
into money and then spent the money to buy the
like
raid
that.
zone.
Play
Like
real
there's
life.
always a way
Hey.
to do that.
Hey, real life is hard, man.
It's the hardest game around, man, I know.
The graphics are terrible. They deserve it.
I'm great in MMOs, not so great in the real life thing. No, I know firsthand, but I would say I want to distance myself from saying that people don't deserve something. That's not what I'm being devil's advocate and expressing the trivialization of accomplishment rather than saying that it shouldn't exist. Because I think you're right. I think that there are people like I won't name names. I have friends who have a gargantuan.
Anko's a great raider. Just saying.
Anko's like, yeah, he's in win, right? And a Baron, so he's kind of a legend. Anko, we miss you, man.
Wait, continue.
So there are people who are achievement hunters, right? They have put in enormous effort, right? In fact, I think these are the pinnacle. These are like the top tier raiders of what Guild Wars 2 is actually made for, right? They're not made for the end game raiders like WoW is. They're made for the casual player, and of the casual player not doing that kind of content, the people who are like achievement hunters who have like 40,000 AP are the pinnacle of like the Guild Wars 2 player that they're looking for. Oftentimes they're not hardcore raiders. Maybe they don't have the fastest fingers in the world. Let's be perfectly honest. Guild Wars 2 raiding, we talked about it with gearing, right? Gearing is super easy. But the actual performance of your character, right? Like the gearing portion is super easy, but the performance of your character is harder in this game than it is in most MMOs that have the gearing thing through the roof, right? It's much harder. So like for people who are casual, who invest a huge amount of time in this game, they're super invested. They put in tons of hours. They're whales, all this stuff. Maybe just don't have the fastest fingers in the world. There are achievements and accomplishments, however much we just spent the last hour and a half saying that it's not enough. They exist locked behind raids. There's some things, some skins, some achievement points that you cannot get unless you do raids. If they have been so accomplished in this game that they have made enough money that they can buy their way into being carried by abandoned adventurers to accomplish this goal, does that not also make the game more realistic in a way, that more immersive, that there are not just only certain avenues that you can accomplish things in, but that you can become a wheeler and dealer and trader of exotic things and then like hire a band of adventurers to take you through to slay the, like, I get it. It takes all types, right? I think that I'm not saying that it's bad, but it definitely does have an impact. And to me, more so than raid selling, the ability to sell everything locked behind a raid on an open trading market does, at least for me, trivialize raid accomplishment. I've always been sort of against that. It feels icky to me.
That's fair.
There was a couple more questions that are actually, it's a two-part question before we wrap up. Let's see. Mai and Phoenix had talked about the Final Fantasy crafting, and I know we had just touched on this a little while ago, but that in that situation, it actually is satisfying. Final Fantasy does crafting in quite a unique way. It's one of the things that surprised me, but when I got into that game, that it actually was worth something, because in Guild Wars 2, crafting really isn't. You don't really make money crafting. In
It's
Final
worth
Fantasy,
something once.
Yeah, it's worth something just to do it.
Unless you have a guild hall.
I think that's a consequence of Guild Wars 2 not having a gear treadmill, though. I think if it did, it would be more worthwhile, like Final Fantasy, right? Like if gear was replaced every time, if Ascended gear got replaced every expansion. I mean, if we had more frequent expansion, every living story, if you know, then
I would say that is true, except for the fact that Guild Wars 2 also allows you, so like you can craft the best gear ever, and if that was just the only thing to consider, and every time they came out with an expansion, you could then craft better gear if that was coming out. The other thing is that you can get Ascended gear from anything. So like that would, like, you don't have to craft it. You can just get it from around in open world or PvP. Like no matter what, because of the gear, because of the itemization of Guild Wars 2, crafting is always trivial unless you really decide that's the way you want to achieve that Ascended gear, because it's just an option. It's not a tangible advantage. It's a choice among several possibilities.
Well, what about the idea, like Eliandria had said also, that just some crafted materials can only be picked up by a certain mob to craft a weapon or armor, which would cause motivation, right? If maybe that was in a
Yep.
raid.
No, and that's super true, right? Something like if you got down to the bottom of that dungeon, right? I'm the cleric, you're the wizard, and he's the warrior. We fight down to the bottom of the dungeon, slay the dragon, and he drops the flaming fiery dragon axe of doom, and then also like a dragon's tooth, which is a super hard to find thing that could be crafted through legendary crafting into some big bad thing. It would accomplish the same thing and maybe even make it cooler, right? Like there are ways to make crafting cool for sure. That don't even just have to do with how you do it, right? Like Guild Wars 2, I think crafting is not super fun. Like the act of it is not super fun. I think Final Fantasy, it is more fun. In ESO, it's more fun. It's one of the most fun craftings. I wish Isa was here. One of the most fun crafting I've ever done is in EverQuest 2, which was very active. You had like a completion bar and a timer, and like things would go wrong. Like you were working on a loom, and you were trying to make like a crafted fabric pants, and then like while you're pressing the buttons and doing stuff, like something bad would happen. You get like a run in the fabric and be like, oh crap, and now you have to like counteract problems that are happening by actively pressing buttons to try to get it completed. Like it was a mini game that was fun, and I really loved that. I like when games make crafting worth it, but I have to give them like the benefit of the doubt. Like it is a difficult thing to make worth it and make it continually stay worth it as the game continues, right? And I can say we crafted our first set of ascended armor. Right? We crafted that.
Yeah,
I think that was what everybody did back then.
Yeah.
And then you never did it again because you had that one set of ascended armor, and then you used that ascended geared character to just accumulate other ascendants. I never crafted again.
Yeah.
I will say, my Professor Meyer was talking about EVE Online's economy. Absolutely right. It wouldn't. The cycle of destruction is what keeps EVE Online's economy stable mostly. So I don't think it would work in any other system, but.
It's a tough thing. It's a tough set. In fact, there could be an entire podcast on crafting because crafting is such a whole world in and of itself.
And also, wanted to touch back on something you said, Merrick, about things like events happening in a game and then going away.
Yep.
That can also be a positive experience. Think of your zombie thing in ESO when that finally came back and you got the look you wanted from something that had been gone forever. You were super excited. Or the legendary pack in STO. It can be a positive thing too.
Yeah. So, right. As long as it comes back, right? I guess that's the thing. There has to be the dream that something can come back, because if it doesn't come back, you literally just missed out.
Well,
and
right.
I think
You need that hope, even if it's hope of, okay, in 2 years and we'll come back. You can't completely cut that off from people because they're going to get disappointed.
And here's a bit of a meme. The thing that Cryptic is talking about is in ESO. And I before we end this stream, I want to go back to something that I think is really important, and that is that sometimes itemization can't solve everything. There can't, like Guild Wars 2 can't turn this around and change the itemization in a way that is going to feel more like WoW or make bosses feel more incentivized to be done or whatever. But there are ways still to make it more rewarding, and one of them is that a lot of the best things, like this again leads on to something that could be an entire podcast by itself, but the payment model that Guild Wars 2 is makes it so there has to be a certain amount of stuff that is bought through the gem store. We all accept it. They did a pretty good job of it, right? Like I'd say most people that are afraid of cash shops, pay to win kind of stuff, they can really feel like Guild Wars 2 isn't one of those ones that's really bad. The best, coolest mount skins in the game are not coming from bosses or achievements. In Guild Wars 2, there's, all that fancy stuff is coming from the gem store, and in or like infusions that are so rare that you're probably never going to get them. I remember going to ESO and being shocked that you could like accomplish a series of quests in this thing, and it would unlock these cool cosmetics options, new hairstyles, new outfits like they are in Guild Wars 2, or skins, or personalities. Personalities are freaking awesome, right? Like Cryptic Survey talked about this before. In case you guys have never played ESO, it is another customization you can give to your character that changes its personality. In fact, so if Cryptic and I, if he makes a like an assassin and I make a warrior, and we just stand there in our arm, like say we take all of our armor off, or we wear the same outfit, we look exactly the same. But in ESO, you can put on different personality. So I could put on like the brassy assassin personality. I now my static standing position has been changed. I'm now like leaning back all sassy with my hand on my hip holding a dagger that was not there normally. And instead of like my idle animations is pulling out a dagger and flipping it around, or like flipping a coin and looking all cool, it'll augment some emotes. So instead of juggling, like if you do /juggle, you just pull out balls and you juggle them. But if you have like the wizard one, you instead create fireballs and you're like moving fireballs around. Like it augments emotes, augments the way you stand, augments the way that you walk, augments the way that you run, sneak, basic animations. This is a way to further customize your character in a way that is not, intangible. This is such a cool thing. Like, yeah, buddy, doesn't that sound freaking awesome to someone who hasn't played ESO? Like, if they brought that to Guild Wars 2, would you not spend copious amounts of gems for this? Because I would, right? These are cool elements. Or what about in things like Path of Exile, where say you want to be a necromancer summoner build, and like you're summoning an armies of undead, right? Like, and let's liken it to Guild Wars 2. You can be a necro and summon a ton of stuff, but they're hideous. They're like gross and grotesque and all that. But you can get something from that game that augments an ability so that instead of summoning, it doesn't change it on a practical level, but instead of summoning undead, you're raising stone minions from the ground. It changes the way that looks. These are things that could be put in the game, like Cryptic was saying, like that you could change it. Your Dragon Hunter example, right?
Yeah.
Like things that change, or the Golem example, where you summon lots of golems instead of one big golem. Like maybe it doesn't even do anything physically different or tangibly different, practically different. Maybe it just looks and feels different, right? They like put stuff. There needs to be incentive in a game that can bypass some of the itemization issues. And these are possible. These exist in other MMOs. This is what I'm always talking about. Every MMO comes out and pretends like they're the only ones. Like, to me, I'm like, how dare you? Like, there's 20 years of this genre, and there are great ideas out there. We are well beyond feeling like you need to reinvent the wheel every time. Steal the good ideas and then add some of your own. Because there has got to be incentive for everyone to do the content.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen what like Guild Wars has made so many missteps with, monetization and those kind of things. I mean, their biggest thing is they invented this whole item placement system for guild halls and then didn't make a housing system.
And in Guild Wars 2, is that not the exact player base that would
exactly.
love player housing?
Yeah.
Let's be honest, not every player base is going to love it. World of Warcraft players, I doubt they care, right? They got their garrisons or whatever in Warlords of Draenor. Nobody cared. Nobody likes it. These are not dorky role players sitting around wanting to hang their swords on the wall and role play with each other, right? They exist everywhere, including in World of Warcraft, but that's not the main player base. Guild Wars 2, oh man. Give us player housing and make it so that we can take our legendaries and hang them on the wall when we're done using them, or Zaitan's head and mount it, right? Or put things in, like when you down a boss, have it drop a rare chance to drop its emblem that you can then sport in your house or put in the gem store. This is the exact community that would love that, and the game is primed for it. You want a way to incentivize stuff that doesn't need to rework itemization? Player housing. Bam. Yep. We fixed it, Net. You're welcome.
We see people getting their own personal guild halls just to treat it like a house. I don't understand why they haven't put in a player housing system.
Tundra, I'm totally drinking coffee.
There. Missed opportunity. All right, I guess this is a good time to wrap up, Merrick.
Yeah, I guess so. First of all, thank you everyone for coming and hanging out with us. Obviously, Junie and I have been gone for a long time. The stream is much smaller now, but those of you guys who are coming and hanging out with us every day, we really, really appreciate it. We're going to be doing these podcasts every single week. We will not be missing a week. We're doing Fridays every week at about that time, somewhere around 8 o'clock. So stay tuned for Twitter updates that we'll be doing. Follow us on Twitter, Merrick TV, and Instagram, Merrick TV. YouTube as well. We're going to be uploading all the podcasts. If you missed any of this, it'll be uploaded to Merrick TV YouTube channel, probably tonight, I think. It usually happens pretty quick.
Like, ring the bell.
Smash that like button, guys.
I believe it would be uploaded over the weekend because we have to wait that 24 hours, I believe. Yeah.
That's right. So if you guys want to hang out with us, we hang out every single day in our Discord, discord.gg/Merrick TV. Tons of events. We play tons of games. You can tell that we all like a lot of different games. We play Final Fantasy there. There's some World of Warcraft players, Monster Hunter, Gloomhaven, Lots of Lost Ark players right now. We play first-person shooters together. We do party games on the weekend. Tomorrow night, we're going to be doing party games where we're going to play Fall Guys and Gartic Phone and Jackbox. Literally every single person who comes and joins our Discord is welcomed enthusiastically and encouraged to join every event. I promise it's a great place to be, so hope we'll see you there.